Good morning, everyone. Didn't hear. Thank you. It is a good morning. We've had 2 very fruitful days of gathering and enjoying the fruits of mindfulness. So today is our last day, and what better way to start than with a mindful walking demonstration led by the future leaders of our country. However, before that, I know I've been saying this and I'm sounding like a parrot, but please, please switch your mobile phones off. Or if you really need to, keep it on silent. And please don't answer your phones during the sessions. We've seen it happen, and it's been very disturbing for those who are really interested in the sessions that are going on. And one other thing, please also don't talk among yourselves while the sessions are going on. Again, it's very disturbing because the whole idea is for you to to maximize on what is happening here. And so you need to be a little mindful of your neighbor and their well-being as well. So please take a look at your phones, check if it is off, check if it is silent or on silent, and do not answer the phone. If you really, really need to answer your phone, it's a matter of life and death, make your way out and then do so. But then again, with minimum disturbance. So thank you very much. I hope you will heed that during the course of the day. It is ultra important. I would now like to invite up on stage your leaders for the mindful walking demonstration. Dulna, only Manya, the others? Okay. Anyway, those who will be leading you are Dulna, Dulain, Imanya and Rehan, and Imanya will now give you a few instructions before we make our way outside.
Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to you all. I'm sure you all remember the video clip on walking mindfully, which was screened last evening, and the mindful walking guidance described by Venerable Dhammajiva. So now we may request you to stand up slowly, mindfully, and silently, and join us on the lawn for a brief session of mindful walking. The ushers will direct you to the lawns, and we will guide you by giving you some simple instructions. Thank you.
Please remain for a little while until I give you further instructions. All those to my right, that's on that side of the hall, divided by this aisle, will be making your way to the lawn, which is just in front of the restaurant area where you have your lunch and your tea. So everyone on this side of the hall, that's those closest to the entrance doors, please make your way to the lawn that's on the restaurant side. And those of you on this side of the hall, that's on to my left, please make your way to the front lawn, which is just as you go out the door to the left, because we can't accommodate everyone on the 2 lawns. So all these young people will be leading you in your mindful walk. Please, very calmly, make your way out. We will be back here after that 15-minute walk to begin our sessions today. So, ladies and gentlemen, up you get. This side to the end, and this side just here to the front lawn. Thank you. Now that you're in the mood, we hope that the lure of technology won't prompt you to answer your phone, or better still, even have conversations among yourselves during these sessions. Please switch off your mobile phones or keep it on silent, but please don't answer it during the sessions. Thank you. We begin our first panel discussion for the day, and this is on mindfulness, the brain, the body, and the mind. And this is a prelude to this session.
Suicides among the veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan are reaching epidemic proportions. some 1,000 suicide attempts are happening among veterans every month.
How can we say we're taking care of our troops when we have an increasing number of soldiers taking their own lives?
As we passed by one of the other cops and we heard an extremely large explosion.
I'm gonna go with a bacon and cheddar cheeseburger.
When you're in the military, you're asked to do things that in everyday life are considered wrong.
We have elevators, right? So I know that you didn't have a good time in one of them. You and I will take the stairs to the second floor. And then we'll take the elevator one time. Listen, take a deep breath. It's okay.
The brain is the organ that's built to change in response to experience. We can shape our brains in ways which are more beneficial, increase happiness and well-being, and also promote pro-social behavior.
I don't know how many times I've made somebody soil themselves. Afterwards, I'm bragging about it and laughing about it,
I'm joined by Dr. Richard Davidson, Biles Professor of Psychology and Psychiatry, and was named one of the 100 most influential people in the world by Time magazine.
The brain really is an organ that is transformable.
There were times where I thought Alex was ignoring me or not paying attention to me, and I'd reach out and grab hold of her arms. And
you look at how traumatic the experience a little kid would have before 20 months old to have 4 different or 5 different placements with different families.
This is the most complicated organ in the universe. We've only taken the first very, very small baby step.
Do you want to stand in here and see how it feels in your belly? How does it feel in your belly? Good.
And so the session begins. Mindfulness, the brain, the body, the mind. I'd like to invite our moderator up on stage, Professor Saroj Jayasinghe, and our panelists, Dr. Piyal Walpola, Dr. Bimsara Senanayake, and Jamie Bristow, and Dr. Harsha P. Jayatilake. Speakers and Mr. Chairman, just a note, each speaker will be given a 12-minute slot for their individual presentations and 12 minutes for Q&A. We would appreciate if strict timing is kept and the timer goes backwards, and you will see when it hits the final 0. So 12 minutes per presentation, and over to you, Professor.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Today we have a session which introduces or explores the impact of meditation and mindfulness on health. So we'll be exploring its effects on the brain, the mind, and the body. And we have a galaxy of superstars here who will take us through. And it's my pleasure now to invite Dr. Piyal Walpola to make a presentation on mind transformation through mindfulness. Their CVs are given in your brochure, so I will not be introducing the speakers. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the slide, the video presentation, and having a good time so far. So my talk today is going to be on mind transformation through mindfulness, and I'm going to compare the secular form of mindfulness training versus the non-secular. Now, the secular form here is the non-religious affiliated mindfulness training, which we've been discussing for the past couple of days, and the non-secular is the Buddhist form of mindfulness training. Now, as we all know, the secular mindfulness is very popular in the Western world. It has been estimated that there are about 18 million meditators in the United States alone, and each year there are about 1 million new meditators. So this has become an industry, a billion-dollar industry in the West. This graph shows the popularity of mindfulness. The solid line shows the original scientific articles published over time, and the dotted line shows the news media articles. As you can see, from year 2000 to 2005, there's a rapid increase in the interest in mindfulness research. Now, let's get to the secular definition of mindfulness. Mindfulness is a technique in which a person becomes intentionally aware of his or her thoughts and actions in the present moment, non-judgmentally. Now, this was initially coined by John Kabat-Zinn. You heard about him already. Now, here I want to emphasize the word non-judgment. I'm going to come back to that later on and compare this to the Buddhist form of mindfulness training. Now, the program he developed about 35 years ago was called the MBSR, or Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction. Now, this training method is being used in many medical centers across the world, in hospitals as well. And this MBSR technique mainly teaches mindfulness meditation that includes sitting and walking meditation. And MBSR program lasts 8 to 10 weeks and consists of 2.5 hours of weekly classes. Now, this slide summarizes everything in a very simplistic form. I borrowed this from a neuroscientist named Philip Goldin from University of Davis. And this shows the mind transformation through secular mindfulness. These studies are mainly done through MBSR and mindfulness-based interventions. So what happens when we are faced with a threat? What immediately comes into action is our limbic system. This is the emotional reactivity of the brain. And the scientists have shown after mindfulness training, there's a reduction in the emotional reactivity center or the limbic system of the brain. Now, in response to this, the cortical centers go into high gear. And with mindfulness training, it has been shown that there's increase in attention regulation as well as cognitive regulation. They have also shown there's increased visceral and sensory experience, as well as there's a reduction in the area called self. This is the self referential processing of the brain. So basically, for a layperson, not a scientific person, what does it really mean? Mindfulness gives us more options when we are faced with a threat. So by increasing attention and cognitive regulation. So mindfulness puts us at a better spot to work with, especially when we are stressed out. Now, these are some of the studies that have been done through mainly the MBSR and mindfulness-based intervention methods. We have already heard some of these. I think Jamie is going to brief on this more. Anyway, I'll try to summarize this here. Mindfulness can decrease anxiety, decrease depression, especially relapse of depression, reduce cognitive decline. It can also improve psychological functioning in cancer patients. It can improve working memory, decrease cortical thinning, and it has also shown to reduce blood pressure in some patients. This has been also used to reduce smoking. I think we had a pre-conference session on this as well. And at a cellular level, what mindfulness can do is it can reduce pro-inflammatory gene expression and increase telomere length. Now, if you're not familiar with telomeres are found at the end of each chromosome, and telomeres are important for cell survival. The longer the telomere, the longer the cell survives. So in fact, scientists now suggest that mindfulness training can even reverse cellular aging. Now I'm going to switch gears here and talk about what I'm more familiar with. This is the non-secular mindfulness training. I'm only focusing on Buddhist mindfulness training. Now, the faculty of mindfulness is defined as the ability to remember. In the sutras, it's said that person who is supremely mindful has the ability to remember what is said and done long time ago. Now, this is the faculty of mindfulness. But when you come to the training, we know the main backbone of Buddhist training is the Fourth Noble Truth. This is the prescription Buddha gave to us. This is the Noble Eightfold Path. Mindfulness comes as the seventh step, and it is termed as right mindfulness. So it starts with the right view, and eventually, with gradual training, you get to right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, and then and only then you get to right mindfulness, and from then you end up with right concentration, which is the samadhi or stillness states of the mind. Now, again, I want to emphasize one more thing here. The morality factors comes much higher, much before the right mindfulness, that is right speech, right action, and right livelihood. And also, this all starts with what is called right view. Now, there are three qualities of mindfulness. These are in Pali called Atapi Sampajano Satima. So, the faculty of mindfulness first, and ardency is the translation for Atapi, which is the skillful effort you put in. And the Satima is the feedback, or the more wisdom part of this practice. So all three these qualities coming together, you develop what is called right mindfulness. This is a positive feedback loop. So not only that, there are 4 frameworks of right mindfulness. The first one is the mindfulness of the body. This is the breath meditation. We focus on the body and body contemplation. And the second one is called mindfulness of feelings. And the third is mindfulness of thoughts. And the fourth is mindfulness of mental qualities. So this is, we are starting basically from a body contemplation, and we are gradually going into a more deeper insight. So from the focus or concentration method leading to more insight with practice of Satipatthana. This is described in 4 foundations of mindfulness in great detail. Now the case of non-judgment versus judgment. In the secular form, non-judgment is emphasized, whereas in the non-secular Buddhist mindfulness training, there is judgment going on all the time. What is the judgment? It is a skillful way of guarding your mind. Buddha showed a beautiful metaphor. It's in a sutra called Nagara Sutra, if you want to read up. And he says mindfulness is like a gatekeeper. So the skillful gatekeeper, he knows when a thought arises, for example, angry thought, he knows not to entertain it, not let enter the mind. And for example, if you get a positive thought, for example, loving kindness here, he knows it is a skillful thought. That means it's beneficial for you and people around you. So you can just let that into the mind. So essentially, mindfulness acts as a skillful or a smart gatekeeper at the level of the mind. So So the eightfold path does not end at right concentration. There are two factors added at the end. This is right knowledge and right release. These are in fact fruits of the eightfold path. So the path leads to its results. So this slide summarizes it's a schematic diagram showing the mind transformation through the Buddhist form of mindfulness training or the non-secular mindfulness. And this was based on a sutra called Yogananda Sutra. Buddha says there are three ways of arriving at right release. That is Samatha, Pubbanga, Vipassana. That is Samatha preceded by Vipassana. Vipassana, Pubbanga, Samatha. That is Vipassana comes first and then Samatha. Or you can practice both together. That's called Yogananda. So it's in tandem. So I'm trying to illustrate in a diagrammatic form how you can relate to this. And if you follow the green arrows, you can see the Samatha part, which is the concentration part, which leaves eventually, which enters the area called access concentration, which is called Upachara Samadhi. From there, it goes to right concentration. These are the four jhanas or Samadhi states. And from there, we get to, which is right knowledge and right release. Right release here is release from clinging and end of suffering. The Vipassana part 2 can get into right concentration, which is Samadhi. Some people call these Vipassana jhanas. And eventually, it can also lead to right knowledge and right release. Or you can practice both, which is a double-headed arrow in tandem, both Samatha and Vipassana. One thing is important here is to remember these are not exclusively two different methods of training. This is actually two aspects or two qualities of the mind during the same training. So this is the right concentration, that's in 8th and the 9th. Finally, the right release, which is the 10th factor. So to summarize everything, the secular versus non-secular, as I discussed, the non-secular Buddhist path has 8 steps, one leading to another gradually in an incremental fashion. And in the secular part, we try to work on one step here, which is mindfulness. And finally, this is my last slide. And so all depends on what you want to do at the end goal. Secular method, the end goal is stress reduction, whereas non-secular, the end goal is end suffering. So in Sinhala, sometimes Sinhalen කියනවා අපි gediya pitin ගන්න ඕනේ කියලා. So although ලෙල්ල කෑවත් ඒකේ ප්‍රයෝජනයක් තියෙනවා යම් කිසි, but gediya pitin ගත්තොත් වඩා හොඳයි. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Piyal. So that's the software of the brain, of the mind, and now we get on to the hardware, and that's by Dr. Bimsara Senanayake, who will now take us through brain transformation through mindfulness.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers and especially Dr. Tara Dimel for inviting me to do this talk today. So my task is to talk about brain transformation through mindfulness. So where is the mind? So is it in the brain? So this question has been there for a long time. Now we are pretty much settled that we think that the mind is in the brain. To start with, we must have that knowledge. So is the brain and mind interchangeable? Is everything in your mind is in the brain? So this question remains, but essentially we believe that the mind is originating in the brain. So this is proven with the current imaging techniques we have. We can actually look at the function of the brain more than the structure itself. So the mind is the brain in action, and it is the software, as just was mentioned, and the brain is the hardware. So I think everyone in this audience believes that the mind is in the brain now. So there was a talk, there was theory a few centuries ago that it was probably in the heart. So we know that it's in the brain now. So what is transforming the brain? So it's the ability to consciously use mental activity to change, modify the brain's neural network. So this can be achieved. So a few decades ago, we thought the brain was a static organ which does not change throughout life. After a few years of existence, whatever we have, we live with that, and the cell starts dying, and we don't grow anything new, no connections. So the brain is a static organ. This was a few decades ago, not so long ago. So now we know that it's not so. It's not a static organ. It keeps changing. The brain is designed to adapt constantly. So you can train your brain to change. That change is measurable, and the ways of thinking can change it for the better. So we can intentionally shape the direction of the brain, and the plasticity changes our brain. So this ability is there at any age. So neuroplasticity or brain plasticity comes in different forms. So that's the brain's ability to change. And it can be a functional change, which is transferred to a different location in the brain, or it can be actual thickness of the brain matter, the thickness of the gray matter, for example, and new connections can occur in the brain, which is kind of a rewiring of the brain. So there are real-life examples. This famous study of London cab drivers, as you know, those who have lived in London, that in London there are about 25,000 streets in the central London area, and the cab drivers have to know exactly where to take a passenger when the passenger gets into the cab. So these cab drivers were examined in a study in year 2000, 16 of them, who had to undergo this training before they get the license to become a cab driver in London. And in their brains, it was interestingly found, when compared with the control subjects, an area called the hypothalamus was bigger or larger in the brains of these cab drivers as opposed to the controls. For example, the bus drivers, who had a route which was pretty much the same every day. But the cab drivers have to think and take these people, when they get into the cab, to different locations. So they had to use their brain more, the hippocampal area of the brain, and the hippocampus is the area of the brain which is beneath the frontal lobe, and so there are two hippocampi on either side. So this area is responsible for what is known as the visuospatial activities. So in these cab drivers, it was found that this hippocampal area was thicker than the others in comparison. So it can be done. Brain can be transformed. So how does mindfulness meditation transform the brain? The practice of meditation has been around for thousands of years, but now we are beginning to understand the science behind this practice. So in mindfulness meditation, once you establish concentration, you observe the flow of inner thoughts and emotions, bodily sensations, without judging them, as was just mentioned. So you pay attention to and notice external sensations like sound, sight, touch, and from moment to moment without being judgmental. So this mindfulness meditation actually brings about structural and functional changes in the brain. So I'm just going to touch on some of those. So the area called the amygdala, which is responsible for arousal, regulation of emotions, initial emotion response to sensory information, the flight and fright kind of thing, which you actually act immediately. So this is the area where you don't think much. So this is a kind of a lower order thinking area. So this shrinks when you start meditating, and mindfulness meditation causes shrinking of the amygdala. So it's an important thing because you take conscious rational decisions rather than taking irresponsible decisions when you do that. So decrease in the size of amygdala in the brain has been demonstrated in practitioners of mindfulness and meditation. So the flight or fright center appears to shrink. So as the amygdala shrinks, interestingly, the prefrontal cortex, the front portion of the brain, starts enlarging. So this is the area which is responsible for higher order brain functions, such as awareness, concentration, rational decision making, becomes thicker. So the frontal lobe, as you can see in that picture, the red area, starts enlarging. So your cognitive skills improve, problem solving, planning, organizing gets better. So it not only shrinks the amygdala, also the connections between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex also are weakened. So it's the functional part. So the structural part is also there, the shrinking of the amygdala and the enlargement of the frontal cortex, and the connections are also reducing. So basically, you have the ability to recruit higher order as opposed to lower order, so you will take more rational, conscious, reasonable decisions rather than acting irresponsibly when you use this technique of mindfulness meditation. So you are better acquainted with behavior of our minds. We enhance our ability to regulate our experiences, eliciting the body's relaxation responses. So it can help us to regulate our thoughts and reduce the stress, and of course some of the other benefits which have been already mentioned by Piyal. And the brains of Buddhist monks were scanned in a study in New York in 2008 when the monks were placed in a fMRI, which is a functional MRI machine, which can actually check the function of the brain. And they found that the brain area known as the anterior insula was activated in these Buddhist monks. So insular cortex is shown to increase with meditation, increase in size, and which is this part of the brain is responsible for awareness, self-recognition, and various other activities as well. So the brain scans of a monk who was meditating showed actively extending compassion, showed activity in the striatum, the area in the brain associated with reward processing. And also, compassion in these monks was further demonstrated by activity in the medial prefrontal cortex, area in the brain associated with reward processing again. A similar study was carried out at Harvard University in the US. After an 8-week study using these meditation techniques, they looked at the brains, and there were definite structural changes even after a short time, brief period of meditating, like 8 weeks. These were carried out by a famous neuroscientist called Sarah Laser. And based on these techniques, it was found that the posterior cingulate cortex and the cerebellum, temporoparietal junction, and the cerebellum and the brainstem areas showed definite changes which were demonstrable by using functional MRI techniques. And also the hippocampal regions of these patients definitely showed a volumetric enlargement with meditation. So the cortical areas become thicker, prefrontal areas become thicker, insula becomes thicker, amygdala becomes thinner. So these are some of the structural changes. And in addition to the structural changes, there are functional changes as well. The connections also change, and it's a kind of rewiring of the brain. So it increases the gray matter in these areas that I mentioned: anterior cingulate cortex, prefrontal cortex, and the hippocampus. And also, by EEG techniques, we can see the changes in the brain activities as well. So these imaging techniques show the differences between, this is actually the beta wave activity before meditation and after meditation. There's definite changes. So these changes that I mentioned are further demonstrated by using various imaging techniques like SPECT scans, PET scans, and so on. So there are definite structural, functional changes associated with meditation mindfulness. So this has been proven beyond any reasonable doubt. So whether these changes do they matter, is the next question. So it has been shown that already Piyal has told us how meditation helps to reduce your stress levels, take more conscious, rational decisions, and of course it has medical benefits as well, reducing the blood pressure and anxiety and so on. So definitely these structural changes seem to have an effect with the, for example, shrinking of the amygdala. You don't take rash decisions, and so on. So it does matter. So the brain is a dynamically changing organ. It's not a static organ, as we believed a few decades back. And it is said that there are about 700 new cells occurring every day in the hypothalamus, and most of them die off if you don't use them. So basically, I just wanted to emphasize the fact that mindfulness meditation does have an impact on the brain, which is structural as well as functional. So it improves the connections, it increases the size of the brain in certain areas of the brain and reduces the size in other areas of the brain, which may all contribute towards well-being in general. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So now we know the software changes, the hardware changes, and our tuk-tuk drivers might be having a bigger hippocampus than all of us. And now we get on to the third presentation. That's on multi-system benefits of mindfulness by Jamie. And you already know about Jamie, so he'll give his presentation while he's seated here.
Yeah? Okay, there we go. Good morning again, everybody. So I'm going to talk about the science in the areas that haven't already been mentioned by my fellow panelists. Before I begin, I just want to clarify something about the word judgment, which is in Jon Kabat-Zinn's definition, as my colleague mentioned. And it's often misunderstood, particularly in the press, to the extent where people aren't really using it very much anymore as in the definition of mindfulness. So judgment in this context, what he means is probably allowing things to be as they are, particularly in your body at this time. So the good and the bad it's talking about is at the kind of reductionist sensation level. Jon Kabat-Zinn talks a lot about discernment and about how mindfulness actually helps us to be more discerning about how we want to live our lives and what values we want to live by. There is a conversation at the moment about the degree to which morality and ethics can be included in the 8-week courses that are commonly taught and explicitly talked about. However, mindfulness teachers are trained to foster that kind of conversation and to use mindfulness to become wiser and more discerning about skillful and unskillful actions. So although I do agree with much of what you said about the emphasis in secular and non-secular traditions, actually it isn't as simple as being just not judgmental at all. And it's at these two different levels that one is judgmental and one is discerning. So one is non-judgmental and one is discerning. So the object, although it's called a mindfulness-based stress reduction program, so this 8-week course on which most of these thousands of studies have been done, and then the following course which combined cognitive science with the MBSR program to create mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, MBCT, They had a primary objective, one to deal particularly with physical pain and stress-related conditions, the other to deal with depression. These have been tested now on a vast range of mental and physical issues. I'm going to talk, however, largely about the non-clinical applications of mindfulness. Before I begin, I just want to say that there are thousands of studies. In some areas, the evidence is very strong. So that is, it is paid for instance, on our National Health Service in the UK. But in most areas, the evidence is new, it's promising, but the standards are very low because the funding isn't mainly because the funding hasn't been available so far. So what we really need to do now is raise the quality of evidence by including, for instance, active control groups, which means you're comparing it to something active rather than just a wait list for those researchers in the audience, as well as full randomization. So mindfulness was called a panacea by some people in the UK in the early days, a magic bullet, as in it's going to help us solve everything. It's quite obviously not that, and we need to, over time, understand better which populations it works with, which populations we need to adapt it for, and which sort of personalities or individual differences between people mean that for some people it works and for some people it doesn't. So I just want to I spend half my time talking about how good mindfulness is and half my time cautioning people on not getting too carried away and actually assuming we know exactly who this is helping. So we know that, 2/3 of people will benefit on average from an MBCT course. We don't understand why that 1/3 of people isn't benefiting. And in fact, we're not doing very well at tracking negative experiences. So some people actually find it very, very difficult. And in the wider Buddhist framework, you might understand those difficulties. But in a secular school or a hospital where you haven't got that full framework, some of the difficulties that come up in meditation are very distressing. And so I just want to start with that sort of word of caution. So time is really running away with me already. So we've heard a little bit about the cognitive changes, the brain changes, leading to changes in attention and in working memory. These are some of the performance benefits that are starting to be used, sort of talked about in the workplace. Broadly, you can group the benefits outside of a clinical environment into 3 categories. That is sort of well-being and resilience. And when I say resilience, it's the kind of preventative program to stop psychological distress down the road. John Kabat-Zinn talks about weaving your parachute before you need to open it. So you don't practice it when you are stressed or when you're really anxious, but knowing that one day when that comes, you have the skills then to respond well to that. So there's well-being and resilience, relationships with empathy and compassion involved, and then various things that you could group under the title of performance. So in the well-being and resilience category, part of the benefits that have been found are due to the fact that mindfulness courses combine some form of meditation and practice, including movement and sitting, with some psychoeducation content. So a lot of the time on these courses isn't just meditation practice, but we're learning about the mind. And in MBCT, that's combining the best we understand of cognitive science and how the function of depression works, how depression functions. And there are many different forms of mindfulness training now. So we've got MBSR, MBCT, you would have heard about, then MBRP, which is for addiction, mindfulness-based relapse prevention, MBCP, mindfulness-based childbirth and parenting, and there are so many acronyms. I mean, there's sort of 20, 30 or so common acronyms, and each of them have a different psychoeducation component. So learning about the mind with different frameworks, different information. For instance, in MBSR, we're learning to discern between nourishing and depleting activities in our lives. And increasingly, that's also looking at nourishing and depleting activities in society and how we work together. So, for instance, in the workplace, it's been shown that MBSR reduces burnout. So the rate at which people are getting to the end of their energy levels reduces burnout, reduces exhaustion. And in one study looking at employees within Dow chemical company, the equivalent of savings because of this reduced burnout was $22,000 per person. So in relationships, there are about 50 plus studies, particularly in the workplace, about improvements in relationships between colleagues. But there are also many studies looking at empathy and compassion more broadly. In the UK, at least, there's a particular interest in hospitals where there's this phrase, compassion fatigue. So nurses and doctors are entering the caring professions because they are compassionate, but over time they get ground down by it, and it's very difficult for them to continue to be compassionate. And mindfulness has been shown to increase levels of empathy and compassion, and in the workplace, particularly around studies with nurses. There was one study with sort of 580 nurses from 50 departments showing that mindfulness training helps them to remain compassionate. And in performance, there have been over 40 workplace studies looking directly at productivity, and hundreds more that you can associate with helpful characteristics, particularly in leadership, where there is promising evidence around improved quality of decision making. There was one study which looked at the mindfulness of leaders and how that actually reduced emotional exhaustion in employees and increased job satisfaction and increased overall performance. So decision making is one thing that I'm particularly interested in because of my work with political leaders. And again, we over the last 10, 20 years, have a much better understanding now about how human beings are predictably biased or predictably make bad decisions. We do it over and over again in a pattern that we all share because of the way our brains have evolved. And so we can learn about those biases and bring mindfulness to them so that when they arise, we know to step out of that and choose a different option. One example is the sunk cost bias. So the sunk cost bias basically means throwing good money after bad. So I've invested in a project, it's gone really badly, but rather than open up to the negative feeling around that, I keep putting money into it to hope one day it'll go good. And I think business leaders and politicians are often guilty of this. Mindfulness has been shown in initial studies as reducing that bias, helping you make clearer decisions. And there's similar evidence in confirmation bias. That's we select information in the world based on how well it fits our existing beliefs and ideas. And this causes huge problems for us because the world changes or is different from how we think it is, and we come up against the reality at some point. Mindfulness seems to help us to reassess things and not be blinded by experience. There's one sort of analogous study that showed that mindfulness helps us to, mindfulness is associated with belief in climate change, perhaps because we are more open to information, even though it challenges things we believe. So this beginner's mind, this openness to how things really are in front of us, rather than how we think we've been believing they are, also has associations with creativity. So it's been shown that after a mindfulness training, people tend to come up with many more solutions to problems, and also less likely to be blinded by experience, as I say. So I've run out of time now. I've gone very quickly over all of this, so please do ask questions if you're more interested. There is increasing interest on what a mindful organization looks like, which is particularly relevant perhaps to the phrase multi-system benefit. So it's been shown that organizations that display mindful behaviors outperform organizations that do not. But this doesn't mean that people meditate together necessarily, but more that the qualities of being open to changing experience, reassessing and discerning new ways of working, and agreeing to work in a mindful manner seems to have many, many benefits. What's not clear is how all the studies that have been done on mindful organizations have been done looking at organically, naturally occurring mindful organizations. What's not clear is how we develop unmindful organizations into mindful organizations, because it doesn't seem to be as simple as just getting people to meditate. Actually, developing a mindful culture is a lot more complicated than that. So to conclude, there is a lot of evidence about how mindfulness can reduce staff turnover, keep people in the organization, but only when you are also fixing or paying attention to the workplace culture. So there is evidence in the UK that those organizations that employ mindfulness training, which don't also address the culture that is perhaps harmful, people leave in large numbers. So mindfulness being used in schools and in hospitals in the UK have actually led to increased staff turnover, because people start to wake up, they see what's around them, they realize that it's really hurtful for them. And in some cases, we'll stick around and try and sort that out, but in some cases, decide that they can't do that and they need to leave. So there's a lot of evidence out there, a lot of studies. The quality is quite low, so be cautious about what you promise when you go and teach it. We need to be clearer on what the negative experiences might be, and also we shouldn't promise that this is going to keep people in organizations. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now we've heard about the software, the hardware, and the impact of mindfulness on well-being, relationships, and performance at work, specifically in the organizations, as well as impact of mindfulness on an organization itself. And now it's my pleasure to request Dr. Harsha Jayatilake to speak on mindfulness in clinical medicine and alternate therapeutic practices. Harsha.
Good morning, everybody, and Reverend Sirs, and ladies and gentlemen. Today, I'm going to talk about where rubber meets the road. That's where we practice in mindfulness practice in clinical medicine. That's where we really work with individuals who get benefited. What is mindfulness awareness? To understand mindful awareness, it can help to think about what it is not like to have it. We have all experienced example of being in autopilot, not really noticing what's going on around us. Imagine that after a long day, you arrive home with a very little memory of the trip home. You go for a walk with your dog, and you don't notice anything about the scenery because your mind is cluttered with worries about the past and the future. You open a bag of chips or biscuits, and before you know it, your package is empty, and you hardly enjoy the taste of a single bite. Mindful awareness is the opposite of this. It is the antidote of tuning out. Mindful awareness is about noticing what's happening when it happens. It is about being aware of the sights and the sounds on the drive home, being completely present when you are walking with your dog, and tasting every bite of your snack. Put it another way, mindfulness is paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. Where you practice medicine in the United States, people done a survey found out 9 in 10 adults believe that stress can contribute to the development of major illnesses such as heart diseases, depression, and obesity. So this is one of the cover story of Time magazine, how stress can affect your health. Dr. Ronald Epstein, he's a medical doctor and professor of psychiatry and family medicine and oncology from Rochester, New York, had come up with this book called The Attending. So he talked about various effects, bad effects of stress, and how day-to-day mindfulness practice can affect. And he was talking about healthcare has become a much productivity-oriented and less human enterprise. And also, he talked about it's not that you just do mindfulness or sit on a cushion or do meditation. It's a mindful attitude which becomes as a habit. If you can recognize when you are beginning to burn out and what those signs are, then you can begin to take action before things get out of hand. My understanding is mindfulness regards as a fundamental an approach that respects enhance each person's capacity for self-knowledge, self-awareness, self-expression, self-empowerment, which lead to self-care. The mindfulness as defined is a pure attention, and it's also paying attention a particular way on purpose and in the present moment and non-judgmentally. As my good friend Piyal said, and Bimsara mentioned, that mindfulness can cause neuroplastic change in the brain. So brain is an evolving organ. So you're directing attention skillfully. The essence of mindfulness is fundamental way to shape the brain and one's life over time. One of the eminent psychologists, Dr. William James, has mentioned the education of attention would be an education par excellence. So this is the core value of Sati Pasala, teaching mindfulness practice in school children, and that can improve their attention for their life skills. So the paradigm is changing where we practice medicine, and we have a new concept, new way of practicing medicine called integrative medicine. It emphasizes relationship-centered care and integrates conventional and complementary methods for treatment and prevention. And it also involves removing barriers that activate body's innate healing response, and also uses natural, less inactive interventions before costly, invasive ones when it's possible. So engage the mind, body, and the spirit, and the community to facilitate healing. It also emphasizes that healing is always possible, even when a cure is not. These are some of the complementary modalities, evidence-based complementary modalities we incorporate in our clinical medicine practice. Ayurveda, mindfulness meditation, acupuncture, yoga, mind-body medicine, relaxation response, chiropractic osteopathic manipulation, therapeutic massage therapy, guided imagery, and various herbal preparations. Model of care. When we were in medical school, we were taught how to take a history. It's a traditional medical assessment. Chief complaint, history of present illness, family and social history, physical exam, diagnostic test, and imaging, and also creating a therapeutic plan. Whole health process, we are looking at a different angle, but we can incorporate with traditional medical assessment, engaging the patient's meaning of their lives, personalized health assessment, patient-defined goals, professional expertise and alignment, that's where the integrative medicine comes in, interdisciplinary team approach, personalized health plan, and tracking outcome and goal achievement. So these are the research proven that how mindfulness awareness affect your health, and my colleagues have already described that. And so this is a very interesting, we call it a chart. On to your left side, you have less effective how mindfulness practice, and to the right, you can see how these reviewers articles done in 2014, how has proven that mindful practices can affect your health, especially when you come to depression, anxiety, and chronic pain management. So I'm going to talk about one component in clinical practice, is about sleep. As you know, sleep has been a significant impact of whole health. Who sleeps under 5 hours nightly compared to people who sleep over 7 hours, they can have 42% of chance of getting obese, 69% of getting more high blood pressure, 40% more diabetes, 36% greater likelihood of having elevated blood lipids, and 62% greater risk of stroke, and 152% increase in risk of having heart attacks. It's amazing numbers here. And these are some of the evidence-based trials done in different occasions and published. In 2015 and 2014, they have done randomized trials, had done that compared with mindful awareness training to sleep hygiene, found that the mindfulness group had improvement in sleep quality superior to the other group. So, component of proactive health and well-being, we introduced what we call a new model called the circle of health. As you see here, me being the center, and the mindful awareness around you, and lead to using self-care modalities, and also using professional care with conventional and complementary medicine. With the help of the community, you create the healing process. This is a circle of health we introduced. As you see, me, the individual in the center, surrounded by the mindfulness awareness. This is a glue applied to create the self-care. There are 8 components of self-care from around it, working your body, surroundings, personal development, food and drinks, recharge, that's where sleep and refresh come under, family, friends and the co-workers, that the workplace that Jamie was talking about, spirit and the soul, power of the mind, that's where the mindfulness comes. And also you can surround it by the prevention and treatment and the complementary approaches and the community. And this equation we see here, whole health is equal to me plus self-care and professional care and the community. So this all will glue together with the mindfulness awareness. So I have seen many good results by using this model from the taking care of the whole individual in a holistic way and integrative manner. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be happy to answer any question during my at the end of the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harsha. Now the session is open for it's a discussion time. I want to fire off the first question. Most of the studies seem to have been done on particular forms of mindfulness training. Am I correct? Because there aren't many studies on the different forms.
There is no one standardized technique that has been a problem. Most of the studies are done through MBSR, mindfulness-based restriction, or MBCT, or mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. There are small other studies called mindfulness-based interventions. So there are no. The issue is we don't have a standardized protocol still. So I think Richard Davidson, and they're very concerned about. They're working on something. There was the last paper was addressed because they don't have a standardized protocol yet.
Any other comments from the panel?
Yes, so the leading developers and researchers, John Kabat-Zinn in the US, Mark Williams, and about sort of 8 or 9 of the main figures, have come up with what they call the DNA of a mindfulness-based intervention. So like you have a loom when you're weaving cloth, you have a warp and you have a weft. And so there are some elements that they think are the warp, those things that you have to include. And then the weft, is it that way around? I can't remember. Okay, thank you. And so critical components include elements of sitting practice, elements of movement practice, and others which escape me at this moment. And then you can choose what kind of goes into that. So yes, there are many different MB something, and so it's sometimes difficult to compare those. But work is going on to really define exactly what the core components are.
I think that's very important, especially for the Sati Pasala movement, because we'll have to have a package which is the same when we give it to the different schools. So we have to have, otherwise what will happen is there'll be variations down the road. Right. Any other questions?
Yes. My question is...
shall maybe get the clergy to answer some.
It involves most venerable Bhante as well. My question, or rather the observation, is on the first presentation. Most venerable Mahathero, Dhammajiva Mahathero, please correct me if I am wrong. It's about the mindfulness. Now, he said that if I remember correct, mindfulness equals memory or remembrance. It is not so. As far as I understand, it is awareness at the present moment. Number 2 is Buddhism. Lord Buddha, I consider him as the most non-judgmental person that was ever born into the world. I am not sentimental. This is, I can give examples in his life. Now we can take
can we ask a question if you don't mind, please? Yes.
No, it's an observation because it's very important. Angulimala and such people were embraced by him. And number 2 is Satipatthana Sutta, as well as an umpteen number of suttas indicate that you have to, not to eliminate raga, dvesha, moha, lust, you have to observe, not judgmentally, and then they go off as very slowly. It's not judgmental. It is always non-judgmental. So I want to have my observation.
Thank you very much. Venerable Dhammajiva.
So I am very happy about that, your last remark. How can look at these things from the Sati Pasala point of view? I have a few points. The Piyal verily presented this non-judgmental and judgmental. And there he tried to see the religious and non-religious way. I would like Piyal to proceed further with these remarks, because this judgmental factor, as Bristow mentioned, predictability, bad decision from the uncultured mind. So judgmental. So that one aspect, as far as the summary is concerned, as well as the Bimsara mentioned, he and I also try to reduce mind to the heart at the beginning and then to the brain. But still I doubt whether we can reduce the mind into the one single factor. So instead it is better to attribute to the each and every cell, each and every chromosome, and then mindfulness get a very broad approach and give more plasticity. Lucky, at least, we are now see the plasticity of the brain and see the changeability of the person. It will be more volatile if we can dilute into the whole body. So therefore not attributing the one single factor. And the Bristow, he took the term panacea, and he told people try to tend to think such a panacea, but now the present examples are saying it is not. But from the Sati Pasala point of view, still we believe it is a panacea because of two reasons. One thing is, we only ask volunteered people to come. So therefore, we are not going to take the responsibility of the whole community. But when you are presenting, we present to each and everyone. It is more applicable to the facilitators to understand whether the facilitator is already benefited and how can he or she relate to the message. And the second thing is, we are not going by or controlled by money. Everything is voluntary. So when these two comes, we facilitators or mindful presenters must have kind of a benevolent idea. It is applicable for everything. Only people, those who are volunteering, will be in the list, the first. But we have to work it out through the consent of the community. Slowly, it is boiling down to the whole population. So we must go with the panacea idea. Of course, because Bodhi itself is raised this question, and we are now thinking about it. And due to the two reasons, as I mentioned already, we are doing only with the voluntary, no money involvement. And the other is therapeutic and preventive. You mentioned about the healing without cure. That is the kind of thing we have to take care. So I know this is not the best time to have the long discussion, but I am suggesting is, please keep them in your mind, and while your career, please work from the lens of the Sati Pasala and feedback. I think Saroj will be the best person for that also, the coordination. So it is not a question, it's a kind of a remark from Dhammajiva. Thank you very much.
Just a comment. Now, if you take a suicide bomber, he's very mindful. Very mindful. He remember everything, what he has to do. But it's not the skillful judgment. So in the faculty of mindfulness, in the Indriya, if you go up and read Indriya Bhavana Sutra, Buddha very clearly described the person who is supremely mindful is the person who can remember what is said and done long time ago. So the important thing is judgment versus non-judgment. It's a skillful judgment. Because in the West, when you say judge, it's a bad thing, judging. But here we are always judging, because if the negative thoughts come up, we need to get rid of it. So this is more like a function of right effort.
Yes. I'd like to ask from a doctor from Toronto, I think. You're next to you with the blue shirt, who mentioned about the equality between mind and brain, actually. And I was under the impression that the research that was being done with the Buddhist monks, for instance, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama, for instance, in the mind-life experiments, that what came out is that mind is actually something different from just the brain. And then we have to ask questions, for instance, what about the out-of-the-body experiences or the near-death experiences and the remembrance of previous lives and things like that, if the brain is exactly the same as the mind?
Thank you very much. Actually, you cannot say that the brain is exactly the same as the mind, but where exactly in the brain the mind activity is located also is not really known. But with the current knowledge we have, we are able to see the actual functioning of the brain during mindful activities. So that's where we are. So we have we have an understanding to say that the mind is most likely to be in the brain, but it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. So there was this idea of being dualism was by a French neuroscientist, I think, many years ago, talked about dualism, where these are two different things. Mind and brain may act hand in hand, but it's not entirely brain alone. So I agree with that.
One final question.
Anybody in the panel? Thank you very much for the wonderful insight. Basically, the mindfulness is something which is derived from faith. And here I see a lot of things extracted from research. Are we undermining someone who has already proven and produced results and wasting our time when we based something on research and not found and found? Anybody in the panel?
Very fundamental question.
So just first of all, really recognizing that the culture in Sri Lanka is very different from the culture in UK and the rest of the Western world. We absolutely need to have both standardization and empirical academic evidence to get public money to pay for mindfulness training for those at risk of depression in the UK. There's just absolutely no question about it. I think you have an opportunity here to have a debate about forms of knowledge and what you can take from your culture and know to be the case. I would caution that we're finding that different populations and different personalities react in different ways, in different contexts, and we need to be sort of humble about what we think we know. So what works for the Venerable Sangha in a monastic setting might not work in exactly how we think it might work out in other environments, in prisons, in office blocks and that kind of thing. So it's not so much necessarily distrusting what the base theory is, but more what's the most skillful form of teaching it, that's all.
Thank you very much. I think we have to bring this session to a close. So we first heard about the software of the mind and the impact of mindfulness. Then we got on to the hardware of the brain. Bimsara described the changes which are seen in the brain, some of which last quite a long time. Then we heard about the benefits, especially in the workplace, by Jamie, and its importance in leadership, decision-making, etc., and also in climate change. And by the way, there are two sessions which follow. One is on climate change and mindfulness, and one is on governance and mindfulness, which will explore those areas further. And finally, we heard about the therapeutic importance of mindfulness. So let us once again thank the panel, and thank you very much.
And also to our moderator, I'd like to call Chula Virakun up on stage to present the thank yous to our speakers and moderators for this session. Firstly to Dr. Piyal Walpola. Dr. Bimsara Senanayake. Mr. Jamie Bristow. And Dr. Harsha Jayatilake. Thank you, Mr. Virakon, and thank you to our panelists for a super start to the day. We're having a short break, just for you to stretch your legs. We'd like to have you back here by 10 minutes past 10. But in the meanwhile, if you would like to visit the Sati Pasala lounge and give your details in, even whether you need some information or if you would like to help in any way, please do so. The lounge is, one of the ushers will direct you to the Sati Pasala lounge if you do want to find anything out. Thank you.